In a quiet mountain town far from the noise of modern life, lived a girl named Clara. She was 13, barefoot more often than not, and spoke with a gentleness that made even the wind pause to listen. But it wasn't her soft voice or her curious eyes that made her different. It was what she claimed to hear. Clara said angels spoke to her. She didn't whisper it in secrecy or hide it behind embarrassed glances. She said it clearly, with the conviction of someone telling the truth. The voices came at night, she said, like distant songs carried on invisible winds. They spoke of things she couldn't understand, warnings, promises, names she'd never heard before. The townspeople, however, didn't share her wonder. Some pitied her. Others whispered that her mind had wandered too far. Most simply turned away. Clara, once surrounded by friends and neighbors, became a quiet figure walking alone. But not for long, because what Clara heard in the silence would soon echo through the entire town. And when it did, no one, absolutely no one, would be able to ignore it again. Clara's days became quieter as the town's whispers grew louder. Parents pulled their children closer when she passed. At school, desks near hers sat empty. Even her teacher stopped calling on her in class. Still, Clara didn't argue or protest. Each night, she climbed onto the roof of her home, lay beneath the stars, and listened. The voices returned every time the world went still. They spoke not in human tongues, but in tones and harmonies that shaped images in her mind. A bridge crumbling into a river, a child crying beneath rubble, and a fire breaking out in the chapel's attic. Clara wrote everything down in a little leather notebook she kept under her pillow. Her drawings were strange, part symbols, part maps, part visions. One day she stood before the church during Sunday service and tried to warn them. "There will be fire," she said, her voice clear but trembling. Not from anger, from warning. Laughter echoed through the pews. The priest, with a forced smile, placed a hand on her shoulder and led her outside. He told her to rest, to pray more quietly, to stop spreading fear. But 3 nights later, as a thunderstorm rolled in from the mountains, the fire came. Not from a lightning strike, but from a forgotten candle in the attic of the chapel. It spread fast, and if not for Clara, who banged on doors and rang the chapel bell until the entire town gathered, the fire would have taken everything. They managed to contain it, but just barely. No one laughed at Clara after that. The voices became louder, urgent, her notebook filled with new warnings. A sickness approaching, a flood near the valley, a man carrying something dangerous who would soon arrive in town. People started listening, but still doubted, until the stranger came, and with him, a darkness none of them were prepared for. The stranger arrived under the cover of dusk, cloaked and silent, pulling a cart covered by a worn tarp. No one knew his name, only that he came from the north, where sickness had already claimed entire villages. Clara stood still as he passed, her hands trembling, her eyes wide, not with fear, but recognition. She had seen him in her dreams. That night, Clara awoke, gasping. The voices were screaming, not in fear, but in warning. Images poured into her mind, the cart, the chapel, the river. She understood. The cart carried not goods, but death. Vials of a strange black liquid, enough to poison the village's water supply. Not by malice, but by accident. The man was desperate, sick himself, and meant to ask for help. Clara ran through the storm, barefoot, her notebook soaked in her arms. She burst into the chapel where the village council had gathered. She begged them to listen. This time, they did. They searched the cart and found the vials, shattered and leaking, their contents already seeping into the soil by the riverbank. Panic rose, but Clara raised her voice above it all. There's still time. With her guidance, they dug trenches, rerouted the flow, and burned what was necessary. The village's water was saved, and the man, quarantined and treated, was spared. When questioned how she knew, Clara simply looked up and said, "They told me." In that moment, no one doubted the voices anymore. The dreams returned, this time louder, clearer, and filled with urgency. Clara saw fire, not flames consuming buildings, but something older, deeper. Beneath the village lay fault lines no one remembered, long dormant, cracking open. A silent trembling in the earth that only she could feel. In her dream, she watched the chapel's bell fall mid-sermon. She heard the screams. She saw the school collapse. When she awoke, the sky was eerily still. She ran to the square and spoke with a voice steadier than ever before. "There's an earthquake coming," she said. "It will happen before sunset." This time they didn't laugh. They asked, "What should we do?" Clara climbed the chapel steps and pointed. "Move everyone to the fields. Take blankets, food, water. Evacuate the school, the elders' home, the chapel. Now." People scattered, following her lead. Fathers carried children. Elders leaned on teens. Some cried. Others prayed. By late afternoon, the village square was empty. At twilight, the ground groaned. The quake struck hard. Walls split, roofs fell, the bell tower crumbled. Dust rose like fog. But outside, in the wide open, no one was harmed. As the shaking stopped, people turned to Clara. She stood among them barefoot, hands raised to the fading sky, eyes full of tears. "They said it would pass," she whispered, "and it has." The next morning, the village stood in silence before its ruins, but in the eyes of its people something new had taken root. Faith, not in walls or traditions, but in something higher, something they had forgotten. Clara walked through the quiet streets, now cracked and broken, yet more alive than ever. Neighbors greeted her with reverence. No one called her strange anymore. They called her chosen. She returned to the tree where it had all begun. The whispers were softer now, no longer warnings, but peace. "Well done," they said. "Your heart listened." The priest stepped forward, once a doubter. He knelt before her, not in worship, but in gratitude. "You saved us," he murmured. "You saw what we couldn't." Clara didn't answer. She simply looked up. The sky was vast and quiet. And for the first time, the entire village listened too, not for her voice, but for the one carried on the wind. Clara had never wanted to be believed. She only wanted them to hear. Now, they did. And they would never forget the girl who spoke to angels. Sometimes the truth doesn't shout, it whispers. And the ones who hear it are not always the loudest, the strongest, or the oldest. Clara reminded us that purity of heart can tune into frequencies the world has long forgotten, that when the divine speaks, it rarely does so through thunder, but through the quiet courage of a child who dares to believe. Perhaps the greatest miracles are not the ones that change the world in a single moment, but those that change the hearts of many, one small whisper at a time.